Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start now. So, let's see here. Okay. Uh, okay. This is weird. Hold on. Okay. So, I'm just gonna start, and today we're gonna learn about cells, which are basically the building blocks of life. So, so what are cells? Cells are the smallest units of life, okay? So they're really small, and they're so small you can't see them with your naked eye, but they're really important. So all living things like me, you, animals, plants, we're all made up of cells. So think of Lego bricks. Lego bricks are the smallest building blocks for a Lego set. Cells are basically the same. The cells are the Lego bricks for our bodies and for animals. So yeah, Lego bricks can be used to make many different sets, and cells are basically the same. They can be used to make many different organisms. So why are cells important? So imagine a city with a lot of different factories. One factory might make cars, one might make paper, another might make electronics, and the list goes on. So in the same way, cells are basically the factories of our little bodies. They're really tiny factories. Each cell has its own purpose, and this purpose is important to keeping us alive. So for example, we have in our lungs cells that help us breathe. We have in our stomachs cells that help us digest food. And we also have cells in our muscles too. And these cells allow us to do simple things like move, write, walk, play sports, give a high five, etc. So, what are cells like? What is the structure of a cell? So cells have small stuff in them called organelles. And these organelles are basically factories inside the factories, basically. So they're really small stuff. They're not factories, sorry. These are workers inside the factories. If that makes sense. So each organelle has different jobs, such as producing energy, making more cells, removing waste from cells, and etc. And here's the little drawing of what a cell looks like. So all these little stuff over here, this little stuff, these are all organelles basically. So here are nine organelles that you'll typically see in cells. So the first one is a cell membrane. And a cell membrane is basically a thin layer around the cell, which protects it. So it's like a barrier, and it controls what goes in and out of the cell. So if the cell was a factory, the cell membrane would be basically the walls of a factory or the doorways into the factory. So next we have something called the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is a jelly-like substance. So it kind of feels like jelly. And that fills the entire cell and contains all of the organelles. So all these organelles over here are inside the cytoplasm. And it's kind of like the floor of the factory where all machines are at. Next, we have the nucleus. And the nucleus is basically the control center or headquarters of the cell. And it has DNA. And DNA is basically material that tells the cell how to function. So basically, the nucleus, you can think of it as the factory's, like the boss's office, and the DNA is kind of the boss. He's in charge of everything, tells everything what to do, basically. Next, we have the mitochondria. Mitochondria produces energy for the cell so that it can function. And so this energy, you don't really need to memorize it, but it's called ATP. And ATP is really important for the entire cell. So mitochondria is like the power plant of the cell, or in a factory, they're kind of like power generators. Next, we have ribosomes. Ribosomes are little workers inside the tiny factory. The tiny factory is the cell. And these workers assemble proteins. Proteins are basically little molecules that we need, like they're really important. And if we don't have any proteins, then we can't function. So proteins in a factory, they're just the product, right? So if this factory made cars, then you could think of proteins as basically the cars of the factory. Next, we have the endoplasmic reticulum, and you will typically hear endoplasmic reticulum referred to as ER. So we usually call it ER, and there are two different types of ER. The first one is a rough ER, and the rough ER has little ribosomes attached to it, and basically you can think of it as a main assembly line where the workers are assembling the proteins or the products, right? So they have ribosomes attached to it, and then we have a smooth ER. And if you see pictures of smooth ER, you'll notice that it has no ribosomes attached to it. It's just a nice smooth organelle. And that's basically the assembly line without the workers. It doesn't make products, but it helps the factory run smoothly, right? It transports materials to the main assembly line. So you can just think of it as that. Now we have the Golgi apparatus. It's also called the Golgi body, but the Golgi body or Golgi apparatus, it packages and sorts out the proteins, and the proteins are produced by the ribosomes here. It packages and sorts them out, and they're produced by the cell, right? So the Golgi body, it can modify these proteins, or it can ship them out into the cell or out of the cell. So the Golgi apparatus is basically like the packaging center of the factory, where these products are wrapped in or placed in boxes, or they're placed with other products too. So you can just think of it like that. Lysosomes. So lysosomes are, you can think of them as a cleanup and maintenance crew of the factory. So they make sure the factory is clean and well running. And what they do is they kind of remove waste from the cells, or they make sure everything is working fine. All organelles are doing good, basically. Finally, we have vacuoles, and vacuoles are storage containers in cells that store important materials like water or other nutrients that the cell needs, so like oxygen, for example. In a factory, vacuoles, you can think of them as the storage shelves where everything is stored, or you can think of them as warehouses. Okay, so next, now we have examples of cells. So the first example, very common example, is a red blood cell. And red blood cells are cells that carry oxygen from the lungs. So we breathe in oxygen from the lungs, and these red blood cells take the oxygen from the lungs, and they transport it all throughout the body to other cells of the body as well. So you can think of them as delivery trucks, and they also carry nutrients when they're transporting substances. Next, we have the white blood cell. And so the white blood cells, their job is to basically fight off infections in the body. So basically invaders like bacteria and viruses from outside of the body, they want to get into the body, and they're very bad, right? So these white blood cells help prevent these invaders from getting into your body and basically taking over. So whenever you have a fever, you'll always feel really hot, right? Your temperature will be at least 100 degrees. So the reason you feel really hot is because these white blood cells are fighting off and killing invaders. So while it may not feel good being hot, you at least know that your body is working right. So you can just think of the white blood cells as the police of your body. What else? Next, we have nerve cells, and nerve cells are very important because they carry messages throughout the body. So nerve cells are the reason why we feel, think, move, and we operate, right? If we didn't have nerve cells, we'd just be kind of like a dummy. So they're basically, you can think of them as telephone lines that carry messages throughout the body, or they can also be considered as like social media, right? Social media, you can spread messages, or you can just like communicate, basically. So the nerve cells communicate with other parts of the body. Now we also have muscle cells, and muscle cells help us move. So whenever we want to move, they receive signals from the nerve cells that I mentioned before, and these signals allow for movement. So muscle cells, you can just think of them as kind of like engines, that power movement. Skin cells. Skin cells are what protect our body from the outside world. So they're like barriers. They keep out dirt, germs, bacteria, the invaders that I mentioned before, and other bad stuff. You can think of them as like bricks, or like the border of a city, right? Controls what goes in and out of a city. It's not really a city at that point. It's kind of like a fortress, but I mean, you get the idea. Okay, so here are some pictures of blood cells, right? No, not blood cells, sorry, all the cells. So here we can see that these are red blood cells. So they're kind of like a donut shaped, they're red, a little bit thin. We also have white blood cells, and they look a little white. Their texture is way different from the red blood cells. This is supposed to be a nerve cell. The text did not update, but these are nerve cells, and you can kind of see them receiving signals. This is the center part of the body. These are all the dendrites. And dendrites are parts of the nerve cells that bring in signals, right? Signals go down, and then they're transported somewhere else. These are muscle cells. You can see these muscles, they have a lot of different little fibers over here. These little dots. And these are all, the purple dots right here are nuclei. They're the nucleuses of the muscle cells. And here we have skin cells. And skin cells, they're typically made up of layers and layers of cells, right? The skin isn't one layer of cells, it's a bunch of different layers, right? They start off kind of like this, and as they work their way up, you can't see it here, but they kind of get more squashed. So cell division. So cells, the reason we're existing, we're this big now, is because of cell division. And so cell division is basically the process where cells divide to make more cells. So yeah, you can just say multiplication by division. It's a little weird, but that's kind of what it is. So cell division the is how our body can grow and repair itself. Right? There are two types of cell division, mitosis and meiosis. So mitosis is probably the more common form of cell division because it's happening as we speak. So it's the process where a cell will divide into two daughter cells. So right here, on the left side of this little picture, you can see mitosis. It starts with one parent cell. The DNA inside of the nucleus, it will replicate, and then it will split into two cells. I will go more into that later in another webinar, but this is the basic concept of mitosis. Here we have meiosis. And meiosis is the process where a cell will result in four daughter cells compared to mitosis is two daughter cells. Meiosis will have four daughter cells and half the DNA. So if here it starts off with a parent cell, the DNA will replicate just like mitosis, and it will split into two daughter cells, but those two daughter cells will split again into other daughter cells, so the DNA will be in half. So meiosis is basically it only happens when you're developing as a baby in your mother's womb, right? Mitosis, it happens as we speak. It's usually for more growth and repair. So after you're born, right, the reason you get so big is from mitosis, essentially. Let's see. Okay, last slide. The fun facts. So the largest cell in the entire world is the ostrich egg. And this egg can be up to 17 centimeters long and weigh up to 1.5 kilograms. And for contrast, our cells are microscopic, and our human egg is about the size of a dot. Like if you use a pencil and you place a dot on a piece of paper, that's basically how big the human egg is. So very big. The most common most common cell in the human body, the red blood cells, and there are about 25 trillion of them. Nerve cells. So we discussed nerve cells before. Right here, these cells. They can grow up to 1 meter long. So that's absolutely crazy. And I believe the form of nerve cells is motor neurons, and I will get into that in another webinar. Skin cells, so the barriers of our skin, they are replaced every 28 days. So whenever you shed, you ever see dry skin or dead skin, sorry, that's basically your skin being replaced. The human body produces 50 billion new cells every day. So as I told you before, mitosis is happening as we speak. And because of mitosis, we are producing a large amount of cells every day. And finally, the average cell lives for about 100 days. So after 100 days, it will probably be replaced, it'll die off, and we'll keep going as we are. So thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions, but that is the end of our webinar today. Look forward for some more webinars in the future. I might go more in depth about DNA, mitosis, and all the different cell processes. And apart from that, yeah, thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.